I've gotten a lot of questions on my channel about what it takes to medically equal a listing. Well, your prayers have been answered, because in this video, I'm going to go into what it takes to medically equal a listing in the Blue Book. I'll define it for you, I'll talk about the 3 ways in which this can be done, and I'll give you some examples. If you're ready for this, let's get it started. If you've had any exposure to the SSA disability process, or you've been paying attention to what I've been saying on these videos, I'm sure you're aware of what the Blue Book is, aka the Listing of Impairments. It's the criteria in which you can find out whether your medical condition is enough to be an automatic allowance or approval for SSDI on the medical alone. Now, most people are familiar with meeting a listing because it's all spelled out right there in the book. However, there's another layer to this, and that is medically equaling a listing. And when you medically equal a listing, it works the same way as meeting a listing. It's an automatic allowance, but it's just not that simple. So let's go ahead and get into what it means to medically equal a listing. Now, an impairment medically equaling a listing is when an impairment is equal in severity and duration to another impairment that is found in the listings. In other words, a condition or set of conditions can be equal to or be the equivalent of another condition that is found in the medical listings. A medical equals decision is made by the MC at the DDS, the medical consultant. It's not made by your doctor, it's not made by you. Even the disability examiner can recommend it, but they're not in a position to make that call either. They can suggest it, but the MC is the one who can actually look into what is going on with those conditions and then make the determination on whether it medically equals another impairment found in the medical listings. Now let's get into the 3 types of ways you can medically equal a listing with your impairment or your impairments. The first way you can medically equal a listing is when your impairment is actually found in the listings. It's a listed impairment. You can read it, you can see it in the Blue Book itself. Now, the findings are really the key. What the findings of your impairment show is how you determine what will actually be equal in severity and duration to something else in the listings. So it could look a couple of ways. The one way it can look is when an impairment doesn't have one or more of the findings. So you may have an impairment, but your impairment may not have all the findings required in a criteria for your impairment that is found in listing. Let's take, for instance, cirrhosis of the liver or some kind of chronic liver disease. And there may be 4 different criteria there. And you may have 3 of the 4. That's what I'm talking about. There's one that's missing that you need to meet the listing. The other way you can look at this is you have everything satisfied, those 4 different criteria under chronic liver disease, but maybe one of those is not as severe as the other 3. So that's another way that it can look, where you may come close to meeting a listing, but it's not enough to get you over the hump. Here's an example. Let's say that you have chronic kidney disease, but that diagnosis is not in the records. But what is in the records is the fact that you are on dialysis, chronic dialysis. So since you are on chronic dialysis, yet you don't have the actual description of chronic renal disease, the MC can determine that since you are on chronic dialysis, you are equal in severity to the actual listing of chronic renal disease. So since you don't have everything in that description, the fact that you're on dialysis is enough to medically equal a listing. The second way you can medically equal a listing is when the impairment that you have is not in the listings. And this is one of the ways that can be a little tricky, because if it's not in the listings, then it's going to be trying to find the most closely analogous or the most closely related impairment in the listings to the impairment that you have. So it's being able to determine that the condition that you have is going to be similar to something that is in the listings that has the same level of duration and severity. A great example of this is the compassionate allowances. And if you're wondering what those are, I'm going to deal with that in another video to really bring this out. But a compassionate allowance usually is a condition that is not found in the listings, but is really severe. It doesn't result in death, but it's really going to be highly disabling, and you're likely going to be an allowance. Your impairment, which is not in the listings, may be equivalent to something like aplastic anemia, which is in the listings. And the severity of that aplastic anemia is closely analogous to the severity that you have in your impairment, even though it's not in the listings. So the MC will say that this impairment that you have is medically equal to listing 7.17, and that'll be enough to allow you for benefits. The third way you can medically equal a listing is a combination of impairments. You may have several different types of conditions, but any one of those will not be enough to get you over the hump. So the MC says this combination of impairments, this big ball right here, is enough to medically equal this particular listing over here. So here's an example of that. Someone who has a stroke, a cerebral vascular accident, that is in the listings, but they may not meet all the criteria. So they may only have some limitation in their body, but not enough to satisfy the criteria on that part. And they may have some speech issue that the stroke caused, but the speech is not significant or severe enough to satisfy the listing criteria. So they can't meet the listing. But when you take the speech and the body dysfunction and combine them together, it may be equal to the actual listing. There's some kind of paralysis and there's some kind of speech impairment, then that big ball of those two will be equivalent to the actual neurological listing found for a CVA. And there you have it. That's what it takes to medically equal a listing. I share with you the 3 ways in which it can take place, and I've given you some examples of how it looks. Now, this is a very rare situation, so I have worked on cases where I've been able to successfully suggest to the MC that a medical equals is in fact in play. And there have been some times when I suggested it and the MC said, no, not this time. So it's not something that is very common, but it is possible. But it is the MC's call. So just be aware of that and don't go in expecting for medical equals to just jump off the page. It doesn't work that way. That's it for now. So go on to the next video. Don't leave me hanging because I'm gonna see you on the other side.